Mus 26, 1942. The dusty horizon of Bir Hakeim, Libya. The sun beats down across an empty desert plain, wind laden with sand and the haunting flash of distant artillery. You stand beside the crumbling Ottoman-era fort, its walls baked by the Saharan heat, mines laid in concentric arcs like jagged teeth around the perimeter. Inside, men of the 1st Free French Brigade brace themselves, colonials from Afrika, legionnaires from Europe, Marines, and Fusiliers alike. The ragged, determined remnants of a France that had fallen but refused to stay down. They've been told their mission is simple: hold the southern finger of the British V-shaped defense around the Gazala line. This lonely outpost at Bir Hakeim sits at the tip, meaning that if the enemy breaks through here, all may be lost. The air is thick with the smell of petrol, mine dust, anticipation. You hear the clicking of rifles being loaded, the clank of shells being slid into artillery pieces, the distant thud of German reconnaissance aircraft overhead. The heat shimmers off the sand, and the fort's bunkers seem to flicker in mirage time. A storm of war is gathering. They know the enemy is coming. The mighty Rommel and his Afrika Korps, backed by Italian divisions. Rommel has already swept across Cyrenaica, pushing the British back. Now this small force stands in his path. And yet, in the shade of the fort's walls, the defenders share quiet glances. Some are veterans of earlier campaigns, others young colonial troops far from home. They share a frail water supply, scant reserves of ammunition, but a fierce determination. This is more than a battle. It is a statement, a stand that might just mean that France has not vanished from the fight. As the sun falls, the night brings no rest. Sandstorms sweep across the lines, the whisper of tanks in the darkness, a messenger returning with news. Italian armored columns have broken through to the west. Mines begin to hum under treads. The desert seems to close in. For 16 days they will fight, they will bleed, they will endure. You step out onto the parapet. The wind carries the echo of machine guns far off. A shell thuds into sand just beyond the wire, a pulse in the night. The protruding shapes of armored vehicles crawl over the mine-sown flats by moonlight. Your heart beats in time with the explosions. The world has forgotten this place, but not these men. The dawn reveals the extent of the trap. From the rise west of the fort, you can see long lines of dust. Tanks, trucks, infantry streaming across the desert towards you. The Free French garrison of roughly 3,700 men, some sources say 4,000, find themselves heavily outnumbered against Italian and German units, including the Italian Ariete Armored Division and Germany's 90th Light Division. You feel the tremor of artillery shells hitting nearby. The ground trembles like the chest of a wounded animal. Their mission? Hold, delay, bleed the enemy, buy time for the larger 8th Army to reorganize. The fort may not be strategically decisive, but the time bought could be. Inside the fort, the scene is raw. In the heat-baked bunkers, men squat by their rifles. In the gun pits, colonial troops, Senegalese tirailleurs, Pacific Islanders, legionnaires from Eastern Europe, wait. Their faces streaked with sweat and dust. You smell the acrid smoke of mortar fire, the metallic tang of shell fragment wounds. One legionnaire wipes a bead of blood from his lip and grits his teeth. Not yet, he says. Not here. The Italian armored assault begins. Clanking tanks seeking to cut the wires, anti-tank mines tearing at treads, French 75mm guns blasting through turret fronts. Reports from the field say some 60 to 70 enemy tanks destroyed within those first days. Above, German Stukas roar in, spewing machine gun fire at flat trajectories, turning the desert plain into a hell of dust, flame, and screaming metal. The anti-aircraft in the fort open up. Bofors 40mm guns spat fire back into the air. One bomber is claimed shot down. You feel the roar in your chest. The concussion rattles from ear to ear. The sky is orange with tracer and flame. And still the French hold on. Their supply of water is dangerously low. Over 2,000 mines surround the position. Each explosion echoes as a reminder. The trap is closing. Rommel's wider maneuver moves rapidly, attempting to encircle the fort from the south and east. Through the dust, you catch the glint of tank barrels reflecting sunlight, slowly moving into the kill zone. The desert changes from pristine gold to crater-scarred hell. Yet, in that hell, they build hope. The commander, Marie-Pierre Koenig, walks the lines after dawn. He speaks softly, but his voice carries. We hold because France watches. We hold because she must rise again. Some men clutch cross emblems. Others close their eyes as bombs explode around them. But they fight. They are the spark in a desert gloom. Each day brings sharper attacks. Each night, worse sandstorms. The minefields drape around the fort like invisible barbed wire. Reinforcements and supply convoys struggle to break through the enemy's clamp. One convoy, under moonlight, snakes its way through minefields and reaches the fort, dusty and haggard. They bring water, they bring shells, but exhaustion has already taken root. You hear muffled voices. When will it break? When will we move? Still, the enemy grows impatient. 3 times they send a formal surrender demand. Drop the guns, relent, let yourselves be spared. And 3 times Koenig replies, no surrender. The desert wind carries the echoed clack of typewriter keys as the demands are delivered in Italian by envoys. And the men watch the sky, the minefields, the enemy lines, waiting. In the late afternoon of June, first a sandstorm rolls in, sheeting the desert in yellow-brown gloom. You cannot see 5 yards ahead. The roar of tanks and engines becomes a deep rumble, followed by silence punctuated by explosions. In the midst of chaos, you realize, the fort's hold has become a statement, not just of defense, but of defiance. They do not know how long they can keep this up. They do not know how many will survive, but they will fight. June 10th to 11th, 1942. The desert night is pitch black. The heat finally relinquishing its grip, replaced by a chill creeping through uniforms soaked with sweat and dust. In the fort of Bir Hakeim, the defenders sit silent, weapons at the ready, listening for any shred of sound. Wheels turning on gravel, a distant engine's whine, the soft drip of water from ration bottles. Their reserves are exhausted. Shells, food, water. The minefields around them shimmer under starless sky, waiting. General Koenig has given the order. Prepare to evacuate and break the encirclement. The decision came too late to catch the enemy unawares. But under cover of darkness, they will try. A sortie will begin. Men in groups, then individuals, will attempt to slip through the wires, cross the minefields, engage in hand-to-hand combat if necessary, and reach the British lines beyond. The odds, grim. The cost, unknown. You walk behind the men as they slip out of bunkers, silhouette after silhouette dissolving into the desert night. Rucksacks, rifles slung over shoulders, the distant thump of mines being defused or aborted. A few vehicles attempt the run, headlights off. The engines hum, swallowed by wind and dust. Allied searchlights flick for an instant and cut them off. Machine gun fire erupts. In the dust, you see figures dive for cover. A trench of palm trees, once mistaken for an oasis, now a grave of charred steel and bodies. In the darkness, the desert becomes disorienting. You cannot tell sand from sky. Shoutings rise, mine, as a vehicle halts. Men leap clear. Others crawl through broken wire. The roar of the enemy closes in. You hear screams, gunfire, the crash of vehicles. The fort's remaining defenders cover the breakout with their last rounds. In some places, they run into the enemy lines head-on. The night becomes a spiral of violence, panic, courage. At one point, you witness a mixed group of colonial tirailleurs, exhausted, blood-smeared, charging into an Italian position, knocking out a machine gun nest and dragging prisoners away in the darkness. One of them steps into moon-glinting barbed wire, freezes, then writhes free. His companion pulls him onwards to freedom. Onwards to France, the desert wind whistles their vow. Meanwhile, overhead, Axis bombers glide in low, dropping flares, lighting up the scene in brief, brutal bursts. In those bursts, you see the long shadows of tanks, the dust clouds, the running men. The fort behind you glows faintly as the defenders fire their last rounds. You imagine the French flag still flying, its colors muted by smoke and sand. The battle has ended. Now only the escape remains. When dawn begins to creep, some 2,700 of the original garrison have slipped through. Several hundred are wounded, dozens dead or abandoned. The enemy has held the ground, but the defenders have held their honor. The fort of Bir Hakeim stands, if only in memory. And in that moment, you feel the turning of something. Not the tide of the desert war yet, but a turning in mindset. For the world watched, the deserts of Libya echoed with stories of resistance, of colonial troops, of legionnaires from France. They proved that defeat in 1940 was not the end. June 12th, 1942. The sun rises over the ravaged landscape of Bir Hakeim. Mine craters litter the sand. Charred hulks of tanks lie like fallen giants. The fort's walls are scarred by artillery and bomb bursts. The defenders have gone. What remains is a hushed silence. You walk among the wreckage. A British chaplain kneels near a crater, reading names off the broken vehicles. The wind picks up, shifting sand across deserted gun pits. The battle did not stop the advance of Rommel's Afrika Korps. Within days, the Allies lost Tobruk and prepared for retreat into Egypt. But the hold at Bir Hakeim cost the enemy precious time. That delay allowed the British to regroup for the stand at First Battle of El Alamein. Historians credit the French defense with altering the timetable of Axis operations. In France, the defense became a symbol. The heterogeneous troops, African colonial fighters, legionnaires, Pacific Islanders, embodied a new narrative of France rising again from defeat. For the forces of the Free French Forces, Bir Hakeim became their Verdun. Although obscure in many English-language histories, in French memory it is a pillar of pride. Yet Nazi propaganda omitted the embarrassment. Their blitz through North Africa had seemed unstoppable. But here, a small garrison had delayed them. The Afrika Korps commander admitted, "Seldom in Africa have I encountered such a well-sustained defense." For the men who escaped, the desert march back was harrowing. Wounded, weary, walking through scorched fields of steel, some carried the dying. But each step carried the idea that they had not surrendered. That in the sand, in the heat, in the isolation, they had stood when others had thought them gone. And yet, time and memory faded the story. The grand campaigns of El Alamein, Tunisia, Sicily overshadowed this small fortress's drama. Historians focused on tank battles, railheads, strategic blows. A Free French brigade in a desert fort did not fit the simple narratives. The desert wind blew the names away. But the echo remains. The rusted remains of Bir Hakeim's fort still stand. Veteran associations still gather. The story is told in French towns, but seldom in the English-speaking world. So, when you next see a map of North Africa in 1942, look for the lonely outpost at Bir Hakeim, because there, for 16 days and nights, men held the desert at bay, not for glory or renown, but for something much more human: pride, freedom, resistance. When the sun finally set on the desert of Libya, the guns fell silent, but the names of the fallen remained. Some 800 of the defenders died or were missing by the rallying point. In this vast war, their banner may not be the largest, but their stand was real. The Nazis pretended it never happened, but the sands remember.